Okay, so looks like we have quite a lot of participants in there, so we're going to start off. Hi, you're all very welcome, and thank you for joining us here today. My name is Stephen Kelligan. I work within the BER program. I'm a member of the BER team. Today's webinar is the second of our webinars. These webinars are designed to assist in providing knowledge, guidance, and good practice to assessors in carrying out BER assessments. Each webinar may be individual or part of a series of webinars concentrating on a particular subject. Today's webinar is the first in a series of 3 based on evidence. The object of this webinar is to firstly take a high-level view of the subject, general evidence gathering on site and good practice. Then in the second and third webinar, we will take a deeper dive into the areas of certification and thermal bridging. The starting point of the webinar is gathering evidence on site, and although some assessors may consider this general knowledge, it is an area that has generated many queries at a help desk level, and it's an important path into more detailed evidence guidance webinars yet to be hosted. So how does the presentation work today? During the presentation, you may have questions. You'll be able to type these questions into the white box to the side of your screen. If you hover over your screen, the Q&A bubble will appear. These questions will not be visible to other participants and will not appear on the screen of the webinar. We have allotted time at the end for Q&A, and if we run out of time and are unable to answer all the questions, we will follow up with an email response to any questions not answered. On the panel today, to answer your questions, we have Auditor and Speaker Niall Leahy, Auditor Colin Bulger, and myself, Stephen Kelligan. Our presenter today is Niall Leahy, a member of the auditing team, and many of you would have met him in workshops or through the auditing process. Niall is able to bring his knowledge from within the audit process and help identify areas that require further clarification for assessors in carrying out their assessment. I'll now pass you over to Niall Leahy. Good morning and welcome, Niall.
Thank you, Stephen. Hello and welcome to this webinar on documentary evidence. Niall Leahy is my name, as Stephen says, and as he mentioned, I work as a BER domestic auditor for SCAI. So the theme of this webinar is essentially about gathering evidence, and that primarily comes from site and from documentation. Some of the content you will be familiar with, and I won't dwell on easier topics, but I think there are a few tips to pick up here for everyone. And as was mentioned, more webinars are to come on more complex topics, so this webinar won't get too technical today, but all the same, there is a lot of content to go through as this is a big area to cover. And I think Stephen mentioned a lot of what you see here today does come up in audit, so this is a good opportunity to take a wider look at documentary evidence as a whole. So where is evidence gathered? There are really 4 parts to today's webinar. You gather evidence before going to site. You gather evidence on site. You may need to supplement that with third-party documentation. And at the end, we will hopefully show a few more audit examples. But there are examples all the way through the webinar. There's quite a lot of visuals and not much small writing, thankfully. And it's probably worth mentioning at this point that SCAI has a number of training videos available on its website about conducting a BER survey. And these include room-by-room survey, beginning the survey, heating system controls, inside the property, and domestic hot water. So before going to site, surveys need to be organised and planned so as to get it done efficiently and safely. This involves making sure you have the right documentation. And on site, you can never have too much evidence. And having good survey records makes life much easier back in the office. Third-party documentation is divided into 2 sections, certified documents and signed-off documents. And there'll be plenty of examples on those as well. And finally, a few examples round off that maybe haven't been covered earlier on. So, before going to site, need to prepare and need to have the right documentation. So in preparing for a survey, you've obviously generally made contact with a homeowner beforehand. You're probably mindful that there may be health and safety issues on site, or there may be sick occupants at the dwelling. So all these can be sorted ideally before you travel to site. And you can be prepared with your PPE to make sure you have the right kind of PPE and to be hygiene conscious. Maybe you need to bring disposable gloves, sanitizer, wipes. Essentially come to site prepared for most circumstances. This means having a good selection of tools and equipment as per the DEAP Survey Guide, which has a checklist similar to what is shown here. So this suggests things like measuring tape, ideally 10 meters plus, or a calibrated electronic measuring device, clipboard, sketch paper, spare paper, ruler, calculator, directional compass. You can have issues with compasses worked off the phone. And when you get back to the office, compare what you've read on site with OSI mapping, which is freely available. It can be got through the Aircode system. A flashlight with batteries and spare batteries. And oftentimes a camera with a flash may take a better photograph than the phone. And again, spare batteries for that. Key for electricity and gas meters. It's often useful to get a date from a gas meter as well. And the key for common boiler casings, possibly. A ladder, of course, to get to the roof. And just a screwdriver as a backup can be handy sometimes. Survey documents. Survey documents have been revised in recent times. You can see there the 2020 survey guide and the 2019 survey form. And these are the ones you should be using. They're available on the SCI BER Resources webpage. And why do we have new versions? Really because they're updated with, I suppose, feedback from assessors as well, but also because with DEAP 4 we have water appliances, lighting, and certain changes in mechanical ventilation that need to be recorded. And when you have this in front of you going to site on a survey form, it means you probably are less likely to forget to record those things. And of course, if you have the right documentation recorded on site, it makes it easier for audit purposes afterwards for everyone. Just on the survey guide, this hasn't changed. What's shown here in the flow chart from section 4, data from site takes precedence over sign-off. Some examples might be you have a sign-off for attic insulation at a certain level, but on site it's less, maybe even more. Differences in the drawings, you might have a living area on site that is now extended into kitchen dining, whereas that wasn't on the drawing. Incomplete work compared to, say, a specification. You might not yet have controls fitted on walls, and you have to go with what you see. Sometimes you can have the incorrect pump model signed off because when you get to site, there's a different model visible on site, and even different radiators. We have to check the type and height of radiators if we're using an on-default flow temperature for a heat pump. Survey form. As I said, there are some new sections in the survey form. Pages of the survey form have always generally followed, well, especially DEAP 4 tabs, which has changed slightly from DEAP 3. So it's really up to yourself which way you do your survey, but survey form has fabric, ventilation, space heating, water heating, and renewables generally in that order. Lighting, of course, is room by room. So that goes with the fabric on page 2. Some dwellings can have more than 4 types of floors, walls, or roofs, so having spare paper can be useful. And also regarding page 1 of the survey form, it's worthwhile recording plasterboard on site as it does affect thermal mass and the U values of your wall. And a note worth mentioning here that is in the current DEAP manual, Plasterboard is not likely to have been used in buildings constructed before 1950, as per Table S3B notes. So when you're in a dwelling that is age band A, B or C, and you see plasterboard, you can generally assume that the plasterboard has been retrofitted and assume that you can input the U value from Table S3B of plasterboard plus 0 millimeters insulation. On to page 2 of the survey form. The survey form in its current form has added a wider column for lighting so that lighting types can be recorded here or on the sketch, and the same with window properties. But I suppose if you're recording a lot on your sketch, now that you have 5 lighting types, it may become difficult to read. And let's not forget that thermal mass is here in this page as well. And there's a need to fill out the thermal properties of each element so that you can substantiate your overall thermal mass. So each box here must be ticked in the thermal mass section. And indeed, on the sketch, to back it up, you should have the thermal mass of all the walls noted, because here you just have overall internal, whereas in sketch you should really have your ground floor internals noted as to their thermal properties, and your first floor also, because there is often differences between them, and this can have a significant effect on the final thermal mass. And the latest DEAP manual, just to mention it here, has the current approach with the thermal bridging, which has changed from the previous DEAP 3 version. So on to page 3 of the survey form and mechanical ventilation. We need to record all items listed in the DEAP survey form, either on your own version or using the DEAP survey form. And it's worthwhile getting site photographs, plenty of site photographs for mechanical ventilation. You need to check that the ducting size meets test criteria when you go into the product characteristics database, if that's where you're taking your unit from, because these criteria do affect performance. So you can see here that the ducting there's an option to note, is the ducting insulated if it's an unheated space. The number of rooms is very important from which air is extracted. The use of flexible or rigid or semi-rigid ducting, and the cross-sectional area of that ducting. Again, on mechanical ventilation, the current DEAP manual 2.6, section 2.6 has some additional guidance, again around insulated ducts and the type of ducting. The product characteristics database, PCDB for short. This is a screenshot of it here, and these are the criteria you have to meet to be able to use the efficiency and/or the fan power from the PCDB. It may be also useful to note the presence or location of a manifold, as this can influence whether you need to take account of semi-rigid ducting or not. So the more photographs, the better when you're in the attic looking at a mechanical ventilation unit. And as I mentioned, semi-rigid ducting, it's a relatively new area, I guess, in DEAP. Is it a screenshot of what it might look like there? It can be a coiled type of pipe. And not to forget, just to mention that there is a listing for semi-rigid ducting in the PCDB database there again, the last option in the drop-down. And when you have ducting that's listed in there as your make and model of ducting is listed in that drop-down, then that ducting is taken to be equivalent to rigid and therefore can be used to fulfill the PCDB database requirements. Moving on to page 4 of the survey form, water appliances. A very good reference point here is the DEAP 4.2 release guidance bulletin, again available on the SCI website. It's very good for distinguishing between vented and unvented plumbing systems. And of course, this affects your hot water store and your shower, possibly. They have plenty of photos showing each, on site. It's worthwhile taking photos showing each of bath and shower. Sometimes we get a photo just showing the bath and the shower has disappeared off photo, or the shower and we don't know if there's a bath underneath it. So try and take a photo of each. and zoom in then to take another photograph or get closer for the shower making model so that you can get a manual online if you're in doubt about the type of shower that it is. And again, using the correct and up-to-date survey form is a reminder to look for these things and to put in not just how many showers, but the type of each shower, and is there a bath. Again, on water appliances, and again, looking at the release guidance bulletin, this is a screenshot from it. The unvented version is shown here of a plumbing system. And as it's highlighted, note that you may see expansion vessels, no vent pipe, pressure relief valve, and maybe a pressure gauge on site to aid you in identifying which kind of system it is. So now we move on to on-site data gathering. This is essentially about creating good survey records, and we have several sections in here. How you conduct a survey. We have plenty of photographs as samples. We talk about the use of personal data and how we have to be mindful not to take away and store personal data. Lighting types we talk briefly on, and just we mentioned about having good sketches. Essentially, I suppose when you go on site, think, what data am I going to need back in the office? So when you arrive on site, at this stage, most of you know, you need a minimum of photographs, sketches, and a survey form or record that records everything that is to be recorded in the DEAP survey form. Photos should include neighbouring dwellings and stylistic evidence, so we can establish the age if we're relying on stylistic evidence. And don't forget that for apartments, as in the middle photograph there, you need to outline which apartment it is in a case like that, and you're told it's a mid-floor apartment, but you don't have any outline on the photograph. It could be one of 4 or 5 levels of mid-floor, and we also don't know, is it at the end of the building or in the middle section of the building, so we don't know how many exposed walls. We can't be sure of overshading or sheltered sides. We don't know how high up it is. So that's a requirement in DEAP, is to outline the dwelling. Make sure you take enough photographs and check before leaving site that your photographs are actually clear enough, because there are a lot of photographs that may be taken possibly with phones or in bad light, and they're not clear and they may not be seen maybe until you're back in the office. Again, you've arrived outside the dwelling. There are mandatory photographs as per the DEAP survey guide. You need all external elevations. You need the external heat source. And photographs also help substantiate sheltered sides, overshading, dwelling type and style, the age by getting boat meters, suspended floor vents, wall vents, insulation upgrades, again all elevations for substantiating that, window properties, date stamp may be visible outside, and you may need to include neighbouring dwellings in photographs. When you're inside, mandatory photographs may be internal heat sources and controls, including controls on electric heaters for both space and water heating. And again, photos can help substantiate cylinder and ventilation details, lighting types, any draft lobby, the window gap, type, age. And just watch again for blurry photos if there's no flash turned on. Recording your personal data, which we'll talk about shortly, and maybe it helps to turn the light off when you're taking a photograph of a bulb. You might get more data that way from the photograph. Just to briefly mention attics. For insulated rafters in a crawl space, and if you're including the benefit of that insulation in your assessment, you need to make sure all eaves vents are blocked or that the roof ventilation runs above the rafters. So pictures at the eaves inside and outside help substantiate this, because if we can't prove it, then we have to ignore the rafter insulation if it's a vented crawl space. And just remember, when you're in the attic generally, any covered floor areas in the attic should be entered separately as unknown insulation thickness, unless you can prove otherwise. And just a final note, insulated on side as a DEAP entry is only for using the room and roof approximation. It's not to be used for manually entering a roof. So now we move on to photographs, the second section in this part of the webinar. And here are examples of maybe unclear or not very useful photographs. The first one, the cylinder, we really can't tell a whole lot from that. It's quite fuzzy, apart from the fact that it's got a CE stamp. The second one, it's worthwhile mentioning that you can often get the make model of a boiler by looking underneath on the rim of the casing. So what are we looking for? Text must be legible, a standard or directive, a volume, a standing loss. This is really for the photograph on the left, a make model. And then for the right, the boiler, serial model under boiler, open flap for maybe a paper label in there. Any tap rad symbols or pressure gauges on the front may indicate the type of boiler it is. Take overall photographs of the boiler and close-up photographs. And then you're in a better position when you go back to the office to consult a manual, or if needs be, to consult BER QA. And here are examples of some clearer photographs. The make, model, year, manufacturer, CE mark, and standard or directive is all legible. And this applies not just to boilers that we've talked about, or cylinders, but also to heat pumps, mechanical ventilation systems, and any hot water store, really. Here we have an example of a heat pump. This is the outdoor unit. And looking at the connection between outdoor and indoor is quite important, because it can indicate the type of heat pump installed and how you should enter it in deep, in space and water heating sections. So look for any labels and pipes. The label is usually on the side. We want the exact make and model required for the designer installer sign-off form. We want the year of manufacture. We want to know whether it's refrigerant passing between outdoor and indoor, or whether it's water. So again, look for refrigerant pipes or hot and cold water pipes. And again, check manuals inside and dwelling maybe, or online. This is the corresponding indoor unit for the same heat pump. We see the white refrigerant pipes coming in, so it's in this case an integrated indoor unit. Again, the label may be on top of this unit. It's generally harder to get labels for indoor units, but it may be on top under the manuals shown there. Again, take note of hot and cold water pipes, pressure gauges, relief valves, expansion vessels. And the indoor unit must now be entered in the current version of the designer installer sign-off form. And I'll show an example of that later. The year of manufacture can be handy to find out the version of the unit. And again, check manuals online. And remember, on-site data takes precedence over what you've been told is in the dwelling. Moving on to controls. There's greater variety in recent years of the controls seen in dwellings. This is a modern version of a control. It's a programmer. It may also have other features. It's got one or more zones. In this case, three zones are assumed to be present because it's got 3 dials for living, water, and bed. So 2 space and 1 water. And how do we know this? Well, it can be hard to get the data from such controls. Look underneath on the casing again. It has the days of the week listed, so it's a good clue as to it being a programmer. It has temperatures. It may have a built-in thermostat. Do check manuals online. You may also see a blank sensor plate upstairs in a zone, which communicates with the controller downstairs or via the phone where you set your temperature. So that's still counted as a stat. Again, a programmer, make model on top, open the door if it can be opened on the front of it. Note any text that are on the buttons, get clear photographs. And for example, there's a thermostat there and also in another picture with very little information. So again, you really do sometimes have to check manuals online or get good photographs and ask QA help desk. Again, here we have a wall stat. This may often be blank in a new build when the heating system isn't commissioned, so you may not have all that text to refer to on screen. It's got time and day, so therefore it's a programmable stat. Again, check the manuals online. The stats may be the same brand as your heating system. Look underneath for any model. And the arrows here are generally indicating menu functions, so you may need to see what functions they can provide. And just a note on electric heaters, sometimes the controls on electric heaters may mean may qualify as an appliance thermostat, which can benefit your BER. Here we have a weather compensator. Weather compensators are generally found with some heat pumps and boilers. They're referred to in section 9.3 in table 4 DEAP manual, and it's a required entry in the designer installer sign-off as to whether there is one present. They're typically north-facing, out of the sun or in the shade of adjoining gables, and may be hidden by wastewater vent pipes as shown here. Again, talking about mechanical ventilation, and this time regarding photographs, you need to look for the labels on units and possibly even ducting. The make, model, year is needed for the unit. Check manuals and any data sheets left near the unit or downstairs, and maybe look for a label for installer info so that you can possibly give them a call if you need more information. Take plenty of photographs of the duct runs, any manifold present. If you can, note the duct type and diameter, whether it's insulated, and count the number of rooms by counting the extract grills, which is going to be different from the input grills. Again, to water heating, again, refer to DEAP 4 Release Guidance Bulletin. And this photograph from the bulletin is for a vented system. So you're wondering here, is there any pump also with this vented system? Because the default is that there would be a pump. You've no pressure relief valve or gauge here in this hot press, so you're pretty sure it's a vented system. And that red expansion vessel is for space heating, so it's not pressurizing a water heating system. And that bulletin also has guidance on common shower types, pipework layouts, and pressure vessels. Just to mention stoves, and a photograph here of a stove. You're looking for the serial plate, any manual present. Are there pipes coming out of the stove? The make, model, and the version. Is the plate CE stamped? Is there a standard on it? The test efficiency may be given. What fuel is it given for? And remember that these plates generally are providing net efficiencies, which will have to be converted per Appendix E to put into HARP or put into DEAP, because DEAP takes gross efficiency as HARP provides. And the plates may be hanging behind the unit. They might swing out from underneath. They might be inside a door or even under the ash pan. Just a note on distant photographs to the left here, we can't tell what make or model of shower, what type it is possibly. If you see hot and cold water supply pipes coming into the shower, then that gives you a good clue as to whether it being a mixer shower rather than electric shower. And on the right, the fireplace, is there a back boiler? Is there a throat closure? Is there a line flue? This photograph isn't sufficient to substantiate any of that. And remember that a chimney less than 200 millimeters diameter, such as a lined chimney, becomes a flue per DEAP. Again, on upgrade works, if possible, show the full extent of insulation over upgraded areas. This applies to floors, roofs, walls, and windows. Are they all done or are they not all done? And covered areas in attic, again, should be entered with unknown insulation thickness. Again, just some examples of not having adequate resolution, I suppose, in your photographs. Is the text legible? It may look okay on the photograph on the left, but when you need to zoom in to actually read it, it becomes very difficult. So try and have more light for taking photographs, even when you're in the office like this, taking photographs, just your sketches. Scans generally do provide good light. It makes it easier to zoom in. And as I say, zooming in doesn't fix a bad photograph. Again, just more examples. Survey records, they really need to be bright and clear to be legible. Try filling in the entire photograph. And check, is there shadows, reflections, or bright or dark spots when you're taking your photograph. Moving on to personal data. This is something covered in DEAP Survey Guide section 4.3. Personal data would include a person's name, contact details, bank details, personal or family photographs, certificates that may be used to identify an individual. It also includes any sensitive personal data, and of course any photographs with any of the occupants of the dwelling in them, such as children. Again, on personal data, an example of a photograph, really, I think the idea was to take a photograph of the stove, but as well as not being a great photograph of the stove, it's got lots of personal data in it, and the lower photograph is a much better example of how to give a photograph of a stove. You can see the layout and the features of it, even if you can't get a make and model from it. And again, examples are that items that can identify the racial or ethnic origin, political opinions, religious or philosophical beliefs, health or sexual orientation. So any pictures like that example. Moving on to lighting. Quick word on lighting. It's now one of 5 types. And remember, there are 2 halogen types, mains voltage and low voltage. And as mentioned before, use a legend so we understand what, don't just call them E for energy or T for tungsten. DEAP 4 needs more information than that, and again can be on either survey form or sketch. The 2 types again of halogens, just some example pictures. You may see a transformer in the attic indicating that you have low voltage halogens in the house. We don't need a photo of each bulb in the dwelling, but it would be good to have a photograph of each bulb type in the dwelling. And again, try and be clear on your survey form when you're making notes of lights or on your sketch. Moving on to sketches. Sketches should be legible. We can use a legend to identify symbols and acronyms, which certainly helps when things get a little crowded on the sketch. And remember, your sketch and what's on it should be fully identifiable to others. What would be great to get on sketches also is when original parts of the dwelling are marked separate to extension parts, so we can distinguish age bands. When solid floors are marked separate to suspended. And don't forget the things like orientation and sheltered sides. These are often missing in sketches. And remember the thermal mass again of internal and external walls and both ground floor and first floor. So moving on to third-party documentation. We mentioned there are 2 types really, signed off documents, which we're going to mention new provisional ratings, probably comes under that category, and certified documents, which would include test and certificate data. An example of how these might differ might be, say, a window supplier can sign off on the date of installation of a window, but they can't sign off on a specific performance like U-value and solar transmittance. An example then of the other type, which is certified documents, might be where a notified body or approved test laboratory are authorized to test for that performance to a particular standard. So signed off documents, starting with those, they're generally provided from industry sources with a verifiable connection to the dwelling through supplies, upgrade, work, design supervision, or new construction. The sources generally have the necessary knowledge and our competence to be able to provide the relevant information. DEAP Appendix K on thermal bridging specifies the signees that can apply to ACDs and to substantiate a non-default Y value. But there are other examples in DEAP. DEAP mentions things like facade engineer, boiler service engineer, supplier, installer, commissioning engineer, heating system designer, etc. If you're unsure, you can ask the help desk, but it's not just limited to the signees specified in, we'll say, Appendix K. So signed off documents, for example, from an architect or surveyor. Just remember, you can't sign off on performance alone. You need to sign off on the construction and makeup. The exact product name must be confirmed, and the proof of the thermal conductivity must be supplied. For instance, we can't use the use of terms like "or similar" and "or equivalent" opens the door to a certain level of ambiguity because we're not sure what's equivalent here, what properties are equivalent. Is it the sound properties, is it thermal properties, or what? So there is a certain ambiguity in that, in using those phrases. And again, check, does it agree with site observations? Moving on to U-value calculations. U-value calculations have to be to ISO 6946 as per the DEAP manual. And this document here on the right is actually 2 editions of the same document. The 2006 version is still freely available online, and DEAP still refers to this, I believe. The 2019 edition is just out, and you have to pay for that one. But it goes into details on how many decimal places your U-value should have, really everything to do with U-values. So check your U-value calculator is to the standard ISO 6946. And remember, when you check your test search, maybe for your material, it can often have a foil emissivity value contained within it, as well as the thermal conductivity. And this will help your BER if you use it. Also, we do see when we get floor U-value calculations, we often see the ground thermal conductivity used not being 2.0, which is the default in Ireland, 2.0 for your ground thermal conductivity. Signing off on works. Just remember to check and ask yourself, do I have the following information? I sign off on exact products used. Do I have a certified thermal conductivity for the products used? Do I have the thickness? And do I have evidence that the entire surface was upgraded? And there are some examples of this in technical bulletins, October 12 and May 13. Moving on to work substantiation. If you're using photos and invoices, or photos or invoices, we need evidence that the entire surface was upgraded, and also evidence that for all rooms and elevations, that if this is what's being entered in DEAP. So have you enough photographs and invoices? This is a nice photograph here of a floor being upgraded, and yes, the entire room has been upgraded, but it's not going to be enough for the entire house. And remember, on paperwork, you must have a reference to the dwelling on all documentation. A quick note on ACDs, and again, I think this is going to be recovered in separate webinars. So this really is just a summary page if you're entering Y.08 into DEAP. And this is covered in bulletin in July 2020. It's essentially listing what's needed from that bulletin. So that's a good reference point to go to look further into it. Again, from the bulletin, there's good examples of sketches and drawings, and it also lists the types of junctions that are considered key junctions, where they include a heat loss plane element. In case you're wondering what is a key junction, they're listed in that bulletin. Moving on to proof of works and having a certificate. If you have correspondence from a supplier, you need to have a reference to the dwelling being assessed on it. You need to have the make model of, this is, for example, is a window supplier with a window cert. So you need to have the make model of window being installed. You also need to have the number of units installed, and you may need a separate cert for patio door and roof lights, as these are typically a different window type. Just a note on new provisionals. Technical bulletin January 2012 is very good on new provisionals, and it's still worth consulting. Drawings, remember, should be signed off or marked as issued for construction. Unsigned planning drawings, for example, are not sufficient. The bulletin refers to U values, air test, thermal bridging factor, heating efficiency, and what's required for a new provisional. And just to remember that when you're using a designer installer sign-off form for a heat pump in a new provisional, you still need the full dwelling design, including heat loss calculations if they are relevant to the dwelling. And just mentioning the designer installer sign-off form, please note that its version 5 is currently the one to use. It's available on the SCI website. And as mentioned earlier, some of the differences are, especially around the indoor unit, that the indoor make and model is now required to be entered into the form. And staying with the form for a minute, the sign off at the end of the form is, there are certain ways this has to be signed off. You have options. It's DEAP Manual Appendix G 1.2 and the Technical Bulletin July 2020 both list the options for signing off on this. And again, this is an example of really partly, you could say, performance data and partly sign off documentation. So it kind of crosses the line, crosses both of them really. A good reference point here is the DEAP start of the manual DEAP section on accredited or certified data. And this has been added to DEAP 4 manual, where you can have self-declaration literature from manufacturer referencing the Eco-Design Directive, the efficiency, and the relevant test performance standard where applicable in DEAP guidance. So with that, moving on to the certified documentation section and performance data. So again, refer to the DEAP manual section just mentioned, accredited or certified data. And examples here are test reports and certificates containing performance data. Often Windows certs you will see, and examples are the NSCI WP certs or the FRC certs. Also ERP labels as shown here are examples, and also declarations of performance and key mark certs. And it's worth mentioning here pumps, DEAP manual section, again the same section as start of the manual, accredited or certified data, tells you what you need to, when you're accepting test data. Pumps specifically, you can refer to table 4F, and again in the new DEAP 4 manual, energy efficiency index has replaced energy labels really as time goes on for modern pumps. So really all you need is the EEI number highlighted there on the screen. You don't really need power ratings much anymore or energy labels. It's all about the EEI, and example there, multiplying it by your default consumption gives you the answer. So it's a considerable reduction on your consumption. This example is of an air test sample from it. Air test report should be to EN 9972, and they should have the date of test, the customer's name, tester's name should be on the inside register, the testing company name, property address and air code, and just check do test inputs match site details, for example floor area, and of course they also have to have the overall test result. An example of a BFRC window cert, just check that the style on the cert as shown here matches the style of window. There's no point using this cert for a sliding slash window. This is a casement window. You're looking for the U value, the solar transmittance for glass. So it's important to say that the U value is for the entire window. The solar transmittance is just for the glass. And we're still seeing issues around that in audits. And remember, you need to have the connection to the dwelling, which is usually in a separate letter. And again, an example from an NSCI window energy performance cert. Again, match the style, and we're looking for U window as highlighted there, and we're looking for G perpendicular, which is another way of describing the solar transmittance for glass only. It's G perpendicular, not UG, which is the solar transmittance for the entire window frame and all. So we're nearing the end. I just have a few more audit examples to mention before we finish up. And again, so it's not just the technical, difficult stuff that's coming up in audits. Some of the long-standing guidance still needs to be gone over and refreshed. There's no harm to have a refresher because they're still coming up in feedback and help desk and audits. So just a few more to mention. The boiler qualifier model sometimes is not provided or doesn't match what's entered in DEAP. Just check that the boiler, the badge on the outside of the boiler matches, so the casing we call it, matches what's actually on the serial plate inside the boiler. Sometimes that can be different. It might have a sales name on the outside, but the actual registered name is on the inside. Check, is your boiler a combi? Sometimes combis are missed. Check for manuals. Remember to open the flap on the front of the boiler to get further photographs. And this can inform your selection of vented and unvented in water, which can lead to follow-on errors. Remember to get external photographs of all elevations. Helps with overshading and sheltered sides. Remember to get evidence of upgrade over the entire surface, all elevations, and the areas and addresses on invoices. For heating pump design, again, the technical book in July 2020 is very good. And remember that the designer installer sign-off form has 4 tabs, and the third and fourth tab are checklists to assist assessors in obtaining all the documentation. And again, the type of heat pump can influence your heat pump type and primary circuit loss in DEAP. So it's very important to understand what type your heat pump is, and to do that you really need to get the make model of the indoor unit. And just remember, your indoor unit, is it in an airing cupboard? That can give you an extra boost as well in DEAP. And finally, this is just it's photographed to show you. If you see this photograph on site, you may be forgiven for thinking it's a programmable thermostat, but in fact it's to do with the mechanical heat ventilation and therefore not important for the heating system. And the last few items are just to back up your non-default window performance tests with a letter or email from the supplier. And again, does it cover all the windows? Does it cover single or double glazed doors, such as patio doors, side lights of doors, roof lights? Do you need other certs for these? Does the cert match the style of window? Use G for glazing only. And finally, for lighting, just stating 100% LED CFL isn't really sufficient. We do need the total number of bulbs and some sample photos of different types. So that's really the end of the first webinar and documentary evidence. As discussed, further information is available on the BER webpage of the SAI website, including the current versions of forms and documents, as we mentioned, and the technical bulletin, DEAP 4.2 release bulletin, and the July 2020 bulletin. And there are also many heat pump resources, such as the current version of designer installer form. So that's it. Thank you for watching. I'll now hand you back for any questions you may have.
Okay, thanks very much, Niall. Yeah, that was very informative. There's a lot of stuff to take in there, and we've seen that with the amount of responses and questions and queries that are coming in from assessors. A lot of areas. I know there's quite a few questions in there. We're definitely not going to get through them all anyway today. We will be following up on them. We're going to take a few of them now, mind you, just to go through them. They're varied. I understand this first, as pointed out at the beginning. This webinar is a high-level view, and we're going to go into other areas. Now, we have two further listed webinars. One will be on thermal bridging. There's quite a few questions came in about that. So we're going to, we will answer them in emails, but we will leave answering those questions till the thermal bridging webinar, generally speaking, so that'll give a broader view on that subject. And then the other one, certification. There are quite a few questions in on certification as well. And that as well will be covered further, but we will answer the individual questions here today and follow up with it. Let's go into a few questions here from assessors. One of the first ones to come in there were with regards an area that Niall covered in plasterboard. You know, that do we have to prove that a house prior to 1950 now that do we have to prove that it is a retrofit? No, this query has been around for quite a number of years, and recently in the DEAP manual now this has been further clarified. As guidance goes on, as queries come in over the years, guidance can change, and this is one area that's covered in page 156 of the DEAP manual. So it is assumed that if you encounter plasterboard in a dwelling prior to 1950, well then it is a retrofit. I'll just cover one more here and then I'll pass over to Colin. I think he has a couple there. There was a question in with regarding ducting for heat recovery. Actually, there's a few questions on ducting, so we're not going to get to all of them, but this was one of the first ones that came in on that. Ducting for heat recovery will not normally be visible. Is written confirmation from installer sufficient to substantiate type of ducting? I suppose this follows on in general methodology that we have on sign-off. So the installer can sign off, so they provide full details of the sign-off. There will be elements of that you will be able to verify on site. The one thing I will say about a sign-off is that site evidence takes precedence. So if there is something there to contradict the sign-off, well then the site evidence always takes precedence over that. But yes, the answer to that question is yes, a sign-off is sufficient as long as it doesn't conflict with the on-site survey. I'll take one more here, then I'll pass over to Colin. How do we account for Natamo stats controlled by mobile phone apps? This is one brand of an ever-growing amount of stats and control systems that we see now. Yeah, they can be confusing for what they do on the very onset. However, we have to look at what they are actually capable of doing in line with our guidance. So our guidance on stats would be no different. To substantiate any of these remote apps, we first of all have to determine the type it is. The system may be capable of doing A, B, and C. However, a lot of these systems require add-ons, so they may not automatically be a cylinder stat. They may require another add-on for it. So you have to confirm that through, first of all, what is there on site, the information and documentation from the manufacturer's website would normally be able to show the workings of the stat, what it's capable of doing. We have had questions before with some of these stats. You can move around the house. That's fine. Again, once they fulfill the requirements of the stat. But the key thing here is first to get the manufacturer's guidance on it and the information of exactly what it does, and then try and apply that to the situation you're in. Colin, I believe you have a couple of questions there.
Yeah, I suppose one question that was provided there or asked was that on published provisional BER certs, what documentary evidence is required? I suppose it's the very same evidence that's required for a new final as for a new provisional. Now, this specifically asked regarding ACDs. The technical bulletin there from July this year goes into details, and it also highlights the requirements for provisionals. But basically, it's not just good enough to have a requirement for indicating a U value of a wall or anything like that. It needs to give the specification of what the actual makeup of the wall and materials are to be used. So it's the very same documentary evidence that's required. So
now we have another one there as well from the manufacturer data to be recognized. Okay, yeah, sorry, I'll just read through this. So this is relating to information you get, say, let's for a stove or another heating system. So it's on the HARP, and also then there has documentary evidence being given in a test cert to the required standard, and it exceeds the HARP entry. Can the manufacturer's data be used? Well, the first thing I would say here is that we always, first of all, point assessors to the HARP database. That said, certified data from an accredited test center to the required standard is also acceptable. The one thing that we would ask, definitely from a help desk level, first and foremost, is the HARP entries and the information that's put in there for particular manufacturers, stoves or systems, are put in there, and the information is given from the manufacturers. So when you receive two documents that conflict in an answer, the first place we would always go is say back to the manufacturer, ask them for a reason why this is the case, and then review it after that. I'm not ruling out that certified document is not recognized. It is, and it can be used. But in this instance, there is a conflict somewhere. There could be a perfectly good reason for it, and we may accept one over the other. But we do have to really start getting into why is this the case and why is it conflicting one against the other. Now, I don't know, Colin, do you have any other ones there?
Well, I suppose there is an awful lot of questions have come in, so I suppose it's a case of trying to group them all together and put answers back.
Yeah, there was, just go into another one here. Basically, it's in relation to specification for the likes of a U-value calculation. So it's a specification for Kingspan U-value calculations for wall construction for a new build. So it would detail the layers and individual construction elements. Also supplied are the certs for the insulation thermal conductivities. There is an address, but no other information. Can this be used for a new final BER? Well, not as it stands. However, like I suppose, if you have a sign-off as built from an architect engineer that Kingspan document and element details are present and built to that spec, then it could be accepted, assuming that you've confirmed the calculation as well. So you have to be very careful different sources. When the system has been built, so you want to find out as built. So it's not ruling out the calculation, but it is putting it in context with another document to back that up. Just one more there. I see encountered an oil boiler recently. Had a make but no model, but not the model. So contacted the supplier who told me the model number. Is this acceptable to use to be able to apply an efficiency from the HARP? Yeah, word of mouth first enough is not enough even from a supplier. You would need, and again, this is covered in the DEAP in section 9.2.1. You would require a statement really from the boiler supplier stating that it is that model. Obviously, your photographic evidence, keep that with it as well. And do we have time for one more? I think. Let me take a look here. Okay. There has been a few questions there on Brexit, on SEI. Do we still recognize the labels for products coming from the UK? We have given some clarification out in an email on Brexit and documentation. However, it's an area that we do intend covering within the certification a bit more in depth. Generally speaking, with CE labels, they are CE marked. They have the required standard on them. They're still acceptable. But to further cover off the Brexit area, we will be covering that more. If you have a concern over a particular document that you're receiving in, as always, please send that in to the help desk and we can review it further from there. Just one more here, and again, it's in regards to substantiating evidence, account sales invoices. So what is it? Recently surveyed my dwelling retrofit works carried out with work carried. There is no address to the dwelling or materials we used on the job that the works were done. Okay, so the account sales invoices, yeah, they are acceptable as partial evidence, but you need to be further substantiated with either your on-site survey or basically a statement from the contract advising where the materials were used. With regards to statement from the contractor, again, we would always advise you to contact the contractor requesting kind of the following information. Invoice and statement from the contractor confirming the following. Obviously, you need the address of the dwelling there, thickness of the insulation, type of insulation, possibly any agreement certs there, reference if applicable, the area of the element covered as well, and photos of the insulation. Details again, I suppose, on insulation thickness, that can be taken from a DOW as well if it's been covered under the grant scheme. So, yeah, we do have quite a few questions in here. So we will, over the next week, get some answers out to people and cover all them off. And the other issues within thermal origin and certification will come more in depth in the next webinars. So again, I think unless Niall and Colin have anything further to add, I think we may be in a position.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so thanks very much. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to you joining us for our next set of webinars. We still have a couple of webinars to come up on heat pumps, and assessors will be advised of such in due course. So thank you again. Thank you for joining, and mind yourselves and take care.